Welcome to More Than Renovating, a renovate and real estate podcast. Our founder, Belinda Smith, talks to industry experts to provide you with the knowledge and information you need to make renovating for love and profit your reality. Belinda will also chat to some of her Renovation Mastery members who are just everyday people doing extraordinary things, following their passions in the renovation and property space. So, let's jump straight into the episode. Enjoy.
Hi everyone, I'm Belinda Smith from Renovate and Real Estate, and with me today I have Tyrone Shum. Tyrone is from Property Investory, and Property Investory is a company that helps finance other people's property adventures. Is that it in a nutshell? I'll let you explain.
We just help investors get a better return on their investment. So rather than let money sit in the bank, we help them look at alternative investment strategies that can actually generate cash flow for their cash or their equity that's just sitting there. So rather than the bank for like 1 or 2%, we turn it around and get in excess of around the 20% mark. So that's what we do as a company.
Okay, so 20% is a pretty good return on investment in comparison to the banks that are a bit sad at the moment in what our investments return. But before we talk about that a little bit more, tell me a little bit about yourself. Like, who are you? Where did you get started being so interested in property investing?
Yeah, I guess it kind of was ingrained to me at a very young age as well too. Similar to yourself, Belinda, my parents, well, my dad in particular, he loved to get hands-on with the equipment. And everywhere we go, particularly every home that we've lived in, he's never, stopped renovating. Even to this day, when I go and visit him, he's spent a lot of time doing up the whole gardening, landscaping. Internally, he's changed a lot of things because it was pretty much one of those kind of heritage houses that he bought in Sydney, down at around that Glazefield area, and he, I guess, saw an opportunity there to be able to just purchase it, and then just did a bit of work to it, and he's done a pretty good job with it. I'm pretty happy with it. But yeah, from an early age, I think when we were living out at Liverpool, that was where I grew up initially. The first place that we had was in Bonnyrigg. I can't remember how much he purchased it for, but he was just telling me about the story a long time ago, and said that he kind of did a bit of renovations. And looking back at the photos, like he did the pond, he did the landscaping, did a lot of things inside. And I was like, wow, and back then I was only probably maybe about 5 or 6 years old. But when you learn and you see that what he does, he actually adds quite a lot of value to the property, then you go, wow, this is something kind of ingrained. So I guess once we sold that property and moved into Strathfield, and growing up in Strathfield, we had a house there that was pretty much a double brick home. And at a very young age, he literally got me on the tools to help him change some lights and do some bit of painting. And I'm like, oh my gosh. At first I was like going, Dad, I don't want to do this. I want to go play my bike, go out and do other things. But I think looking back in hindsight, it taught me some of those skills, because that's kind of what I look at nowadays. Like, I'm not hands-on with the tools anymore. I used to be a lot hands-on, help with the landscaping, help with, painting walls, getting pretty much my hands dirty doing the renovations. But I guess I've kind of got over that as I've gotten older, because I just don't want to get my hands dirty on that. So that's kind of where the journey started with me, property. And then I started getting more into buying investment properties to buy and hold. And I started off initially with Steve McKnight's course when I was probably back in uni days, actually. And, back then he was like buying properties, getting a 10% yield. And, you go and buy those, like going down to a candy store and picking one up every literally day. So that's kind of where I started. And I thought, oh yeah, if I can build a portfolio up where I can get positive cash flow and buy a lot of those, then yeah, I could be like Steve McKnight. And he was my first great mentor, that he taught a lot of things. But I guess I'm not like Steve, I guess, and I couldn't find all those opportunities, and I wasn't persistent enough. So I kind of just got my one property, and then afterwards I started going to learning a little bit more about subdivisions and subletting, and also development as well. And that's kind of where I land pretty much in that space, is to do a lot more of those developments and financing and so forth. That's kind of pretty much, long story short, to get to where I am now. But to sort of give you a bit of background about how I landed into this space, was I did a development back about two years ago now, back in 2019, about April 2019. I was introduced through my coach to do like a simple 1:2 subblock division with a pretty good renovator / developer. He had a good track record, and she said to me, look, I think you two would be fantastic together, because I've got a great database of people who have funds, and who would be a great investment. He's got the skill set to be able to renovate and subdivide and so forth. So we kind of teed up. And we started that opportunity up in Queensland. It was a simple 1:2 subblock division. The front was a house and it just needed to be renovated. So a little bit DIY and, I guess tender loving care that we put into it. And it turned out to be a fantastic property that, was renovated. The investor put in his money, about 600K, and we went ahead and got the subdivision done and so forth. So roughly about 12 months later, it was supposed to be about 9-month to 12-month kind of development subdivision. We put it on the market. Now, as you probably all know, 12 months later, 2020 April was when COVID started to come in. Yeah. And unfortunately, we didn't know what was going to happen. So the market went quiet and nothing really came to it. So we left it on the market just to see if things would improve. Unfortunately, it didn't. So we had to take it off the market. And then literally 12 months later, that's when we actually was able to sell it. So in April of 2021, which was last year, we were able to sell both of the properties and I guess get our money back, but didn't make any money as a developer on there. We put a lot of time and effort, 24 months, and unfortunately didn't make money. But the good thing is the investor got his money back at the same return that we had promised him. So that was my first experience, I guess, in the sense of a full development, being part of a joint venture, being involved in doing all that. And that kind of led me into going, oh, do I really want to do another development? Because the thing is, it wasn't such a easy process. It was dragged on and lengthy. Now, luckily, I wasn't just involved in one deal at that time. I had multiple deals going on. So I spread my risk. And one other fantastic deal that I got into was a 1:4 lot subdivision, which was down in Victoria. And back in, I think it was November of 2019, the developer once again referred from my coach, reached out to me and said, look, have you got some funds to invest? And I said, yep, sure, a couple $100,000, put that in. And I didn't have to do any work. I was not in a joint venture. I was just basically in there as a money partner. And the return on that, I think, was like 20% per annum return for that one. So I said, great, I'm happy to just put my funds in there. And then you let me know when, the development finishes. 6 months into it, which roughly was about COVID time, he calls me and said, Tyrone, it's COVID. And I thought, this is not going to sound too good. What would you like to do? And I said, okay, what's happening? And he said to me, look, I actually have a developer who's going to refinance us out, this whole development. He's happy to pay us, a sum of money to be able to buy this whole development out and refinance us out. And he said, look, don't worry about the 12 months, which is what we promise you. We'll still pay you your 12 months return over 6 months, which was roughly about that time. So May-ish, I got paid out. And I literally went, wow, 6 months, I got 20% return on my money on a couple $100,000, and I didn't have to do any work at all. And I thought, oh, this sounds like a fantastic way to, without having to, take the risk of being a developer. And I guess when you look at it from those two perspectives, which is like what happened, I was literally involved in one development deal, and then I was doing the work hands-on, and I made absolutely no money, just spent a lot of time and effort, and it was a learning lesson, compared to the one where I just put my money in there, minimal risk, I was hands off, and I got at least 20% return for that short period of time. And it gave me like, oh, which one's going to be better? And that's kind of where it landed me into this space that I go, I might actually keep doing what I'm doing there instead and lend funds out.
So how important do you think it is to be flexible like that, to be able to pivot and turn and recognize changes in the market and do something different than you had in your mind in the first place?
It's so important. And I think a lot of businesses out there, developers, renovators, and so forth, who were involved in projects, as soon as COVID hit, no one kind of knew or had crystal ball what was going to happen. Obviously now, after 2 years of being past COVID, we've seen what's happened to the market, and it's gone completely opposite to what we expected. Yeah. But at that point in time, everyone was sort of just not sure. There's a lot of uncertainty, and you go, okay, you might as well just get the cash back just to sort of stay safe, play it safe, rather than take any huge risks. And that's kind of what people were doing. But to pivot was something I think that everyone has to be very, very flexible to do, because if you don't, you end up just basically sitting as a dead duck and nothing will happen. And you can't pray and hope that these things will change. I mean, luckily for a lot of people who did hold on for 2 years or so, whatever, and survive that. But what would happen if things got even worse? I guess you got to just say, okay, make changes and then make it work. And as you know, a lot of retail shops had to lock down. A lot of shops owners, went out of business because they didn't pivot. And the ones who did pivot went online and did something different. They either try to make money through, offering merchandise online just to keep the cash flow going, or just change the business altogether. And that's what we did. I was initially looking at, as a developer, just doing deals like those. But I had to make a shift because at the end of the day, going back into sort of the finance kind of realm, I guess becoming a sort of a lender, changed and allowed us to be able to go, okay, there's actually a gap in the market. And that's what really kind of came up, because this gap was when developers went, oh, hold on, we've got this development site here. We can't keep progressing because we don't have enough funding because the bank won't lend it due to COVID restrictions and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
So that's kind of when, okay, there's this private lending sector that just opened up a huge market where there's profit in the deal, but if there's no cash to be able to inject into it to continue the development going, because they need them, to keep them funded, then that development isn't going to realize the profit. But this is where we came in to fill in that market, fill in that gap, to be able to provide that funding to allow them to finish the project and ultimately pay themselves, but also refinance and pay us out as well. So it's a win-win situation. Plus, we're getting a good return from it too.
Oh, absolutely brilliant. Let's discuss that a little bit more. Let's dive into that. The banks are really conservative right now. Most people, and many people listening to this podcast, will think that when you want money for a property to do anything, a renovation, a flip, a buy and hold, whatever, that you go to the banks and you get your money from the banks. Now, if the banks say no, most people think, well, that's it, I'm done. I can't do that deal, or I have to look for a smaller deal, or I have to JV with somebody else. And there's nothing wrong with that strategy either. But you certainly identified a gap in the market, to the extent where many of my renovators, the ones who are really, really into it and who do multiple properties, don't ever bother going to the banks anymore. They they lean on alternative funds. So tell me a little bit about how that works and how people can connect their deals and what they have to do to get in front of someone like yourself and get a deal happening between the two of you.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Belinda, on this, is that I think it's an old traditional mindset. If you sort of stay in that box thing, thinking, oh, I've got to go to the bank and get the money from there, and the traditional lending, which we all say, is kind of not as competitive as it nowadays should be, you end up just kind of get stuck into this box. So if you think outside the square, it doesn't necessarily have to be to a private lender, or I mean, it can be like a private lender like us, but you can go to like family and friends. You can go reach out to joint venture partners. You can reach out to money partners. There's so many other ways you can do it. And you just got to think outside the square, and you go, okay, who's in my network that I would know? Firstly, that I think I could easily go and have a chat to, explain to them, present them the business plan or the actual deal, and essentially, be able to get the money from there. And as long as you do everything legitimately, put a strong, say, agreement in place, and you outline all the expectations and the terms at the beginning, then usually, it's not that hard, because it's the same thing. If you go to the bank, they're not going to say, hey, I'm just going to give you money. They'll want you to sign loan agreements. They want you to sign terms and conditions to blah, blah, blah. And half the time you don't read these 100, 200 page documents because it's just too long. You rely on your lawyers, but it's no different to that. And I think at the end of the day, you've just got to be thinking, okay, how can I actually make this deal work? Now, one thing I've learned, and this is something that has helped me change my mindset drastically, is that if the deal is that good, money will come. Yes. So if you present the opportunity and it stacks up, it's profitable, and you can prove that it can, and you've shown a good track record, people will literally throw money at you. And I'm not joking. This is what I've seen happen.
Agree. Yeah. So it's a good feasibility. Like people expect to know exactly what the buy-in costs are going to be, whether there's a renovation involved or the build costs. Like, they need detail. People will need detail.
Absolutely. And even better is if you can get a valuation that's done by a qualified valuer of as complete, deal. I just recently had a deal that was offered to me up in Queensland, and it was a nice luxury house. He bought a pretty under market value, and essentially he just went to the valuer and they came back and provided as is valuation. And at the moment, that valuation has been very, very beneficial for us to be able to see how much we can lend against it. Now, the good news is that the property itself has gone higher in the valuation, obviously due to the market and so forth. But it goes to show that even for renovation, just like what he presented to us recently, can still get a valuation on that to be able to provide for whoever the lender is or whoever you're going to present the opportunity. Because in that valuation, it does outline quite a lot of detail. It tells, what's going to be done. It talks about, what's been good about the property. Is it structurally? Is there been issues? Is it blah, blah, blah. And when you present something like that, a lender will I guess, look at it and go, this is a qualified documentation that actually supports the evidence that they want to provide. So having evaluation is good. providing maybe, I guess, a feasibility, on the costs. Even if you won't go as far as getting a quantity survey report done, you can do that as well. They'll list out all the terms and all the costs and so forth for renovation, as you probably would know yourself.
Yeah.
But I think that's the key thing, is that not only do you have the support of the evidence, but also you got to be very excited about it and passionate about it, that you're going to follow it through, because people are not going to buy into, your I guess, vision or your deal and so forth. If you just say, hey, look at this, you've actually got to be able to sell it and offer it that it's going to work, and prove that you've had a good proven track record as well as doing it. So I can tell you, the money's out there if the profit's there. So people always want a good opportunity so that they can actually get the money to work. And I'm the same. I do not want my money sitting in an offset account earning less than %, where I could be actually having my money work as much as possible without me having to actually go out there and physically do it myself.
So typically, how long are these loans? Like, are they 12 months, 24 months? Are people prepared to wait for their money to come back to them, plus all of their dividends over an extended period of time?
Yeah, so typically we start off at 6 months as a minimum, and then maximum usually is 12 months. So what would happen is that, say, for example, most of the renovations that we've looked at is like a 6-month loan. And then from there, if they need a bit more time, which we've had one actually in Roseville, actually not long ago, which we recently got paid out. She needed an extra, say, 6 months as well. On top of that, we just basically refinanced the loan, extend it to 12 months, and basically, helps her with that. And due to COVID, everyone had issues with getting trades, during that time. So that's why her loan getting extended. But now that Sydney and a lot of the other states are now not doing those lockdowns, I think it seems like the trades are all gone back to normal. So therefore, people are actually able to get things done at about the same time as they used to. The only difference is that the cost of materials and goods and everything have all gone up, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So that's been the challenge. And I think that's where we got to be very, very smart about sourcing other materials, if possible, to do the same kind of job that we want to do. Because people are not going to notice the difference if it's the same material. It's a different cost.
Yeah, I love that. Sometimes we have something in our mind, like we want vertical VJ board here, or we want something. If you can't get hold of it, it's time to go to our plan B, because I agree with you. Other people do not know what we had in our own heads. And in the end, it doesn't really matter. Awesome. So, and these things ebb and flow, like how busy the tradies are right now, and difficulty getting products. Those things shall pass eventually. Something will happen and they will pass. And over the years that I've been investing, which is really since 1986, we've seen a lot of changes, interest rates going up and down, and tradies being busy and not so busy and all that kind of stuff. But the main thing right now that I notice is how banks are sitting on their hands in relation to lending to people other than people in PAYGs. They seem to be able to get their funds more easily than other people. And so many people are not aware of this, of other ways of lending money.
The private lending space is huge. Yes, I mean, I have to admit, the rates are going to be much higher. But if you look at it from the point of view, okay, if I have to wait for the bank and waste 6 months trying to apply for it and then back and forth with them, compared to getting, say, the funds within, say, a month or even a couple of weeks, depends on how fast you need them, wouldn't it be better to be doing that? Because time essentially is money. And if you wasted 6 months, that's 6 months of holding costs that you would have had to, fork out and outlay, compared to paying a little bit higher rate to get the funds that you need to continue and finish the project and, deliver it, even if it's finished in 6 months by the time you get the bank to agree on it. And then by that time, then you can go back to the bank and say, look, it's finished, it's complete. This is how much it's worth. You can get it refinanced and use the large bank. But that's what we're kind of seeing. A lot of private lenders are coming in perfectly at this time, because the banks just do not want to lend, because it's too risky for them. But when you actually assess it, if you actually have good, strong security, good, strong cash flow, and you assess each sponsor for what they're worth, then you go, oh, well, it's a no-brainer. I think it's just because the bank is stuck on this kind of old political sort of checklist system where, it's all like...
The sausage machine, I call it. They just put all of the ingredients in, and if you don't spit out the other end, you don't get your loan. They just want the perfect, most easy clients that they can just, pop all the details in and out they come at the other end. And most people aren't that anymore, especially people who are working for themselves. All right, so we talk about the types of projects that short-term funding is perfect for, and it's probably not a buy and hold for someone who wants to live in a property.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't be. A lot of these kind of projects that we get on board are usually developments or commercial property where there's some form of add value, because ultimately we're not going to be able to lend something that's existing that doesn't really have much value on it. We want to be able to see an uplift so that way we can actually get our funds refinanced out. Hence the reason why at the beginning of the podcast, I mentioned to you that a lot of the deals that I've been involved in have been some form of add value or development, where you come in and you go, okay, you buy a block of land, say just giving random numbers, 100K, you do a bit of development on it, you sell off the lots, you probably get 200,000 from something like that as an example. That uplift is where we've got enough equity, we've been able to lend against that kind of asset with serviceability and enable us to be able to get a good return with the profit for the developer to be able to exit out at any time. So I think this is the key thing, is that you've got to make sure that anything we look at is got some kind of value add component, whether it be through a renovation or whether it be through a development site where they're building townhouses, I don't know, like blocks and land and house packages and so forth like that. But there's got to be some kind of uplift in it to be able to make it work, and that's what we always look for to make it work for everyone.
Is the uplift component of it as well another way of mitigating any kind of risk factor?
Yeah, totally. If it doesn't even, say for example, when we go into these type of opportunities, we make sure, particularly the developments, they've already got development approval. We don't usually jump in before the development proof has been given to us, because the fact is, in every state it's different, but sometimes it can take anywhere between 12, 18 months. And if there's any objections, then you'd have to go through the courts and all that. And that just delays the whole process. I've heard of some development approvals taking anywhere between 3-4 years because there's been objections from the neighbours, council, etc. So we don't want to take that kind of risk, which is where we came in with this kind of gap. Is like, okay, if they've got development approval, they need a little bit of time to organise their construction finance, they're getting the consultants, etc. And we kind of fund that short term to help them through that. And that's that cash flow that they need at that point in time, because once they get construction finance, they refinance us out, pay our loan, and then move forward to do the build to make their profit on the actual development.
So do you help both sides of the fence here? So do you help the person who comes to you with the deal, the property, the DA, help them look attractive for you, the other side of the fence? Who are the people that you have with the money? Like, do you try and bring them together? What do you do?
That's pretty much it. We're the facilitators, essentially.
Yeah.
So we put pretty much one and one together to form, more than two. So essentially, it could be a developer, it could be a borrower, it could be a commercial property investor. They have these assets, they need some funds, and typically they're like, I don't really know too much more, but I just need some money. Can you please help me? So that's what we usually do, and hence the reason why we work very closely with brokers, because they usually go to brokers first. When they come to us, we would require them to provide a lot of the information that they need, to be able to substantiate and support the evidence of what they need to borrow. Once we do that, we do all our due diligence, check them out, make sure that it all stacks up. And then from there, we present it to the lender or the investor. And that's the reason why we've got a pool of wholesale sophisticated investors who are ready to move on and put their funds into those. And for them, it's funds just sitting there in their portfolio. A lot of them are high net worth, who have a lot of equity, and they just wanted to get to work to generate some cash flow. And essentially, they just pick the deals that they want. And if they're happy and interested in them, supporting all the evidence, then they'll lend it against. And then essentially, I just put it together with the lawyers. The lawyers, do all the work and, bundle up, and we have ourselves a loan, pretty much like a bank.
Is it a tough thing for somebody for a property developer or a property investor who's never done this before? Is it a tough thing for them to look credible and believable? And what can they do to support themselves?
I guess at the end of the day, it's not about what they present themselves as. I think ultimately, if they've got a track record, the actual deal, such as the asset that they're going to be lending against or needing funds for, as long as those things really stack up, then I think, ultimately the lender wants to know that they can just get their money back. Because, when you speak to an investor, they don't want to just put their money in there. And a lot of people who are here go into joint ventures where they just basically sign up, put their funds in a trust, and then hope and pray that the development goes ahead. That, in my opinion, is very risky, because you actually don't have necessarily a tied asset to that. Because if something happens to the developer, they can close down the trust, take off the money, and then, end of story. And I've heard of totally all those stories. Whereas the way we set it up is that it's actually a security that they actually lend against, and the security they register a mortgage on. And that mortgage is basically your security to be able to do it. plus you get a personal guarantee from the borrower or the guarantor, and therefore secure those funds against that. So if anything happens, you can always, take it to courts and basically recoup your funds back. Now, I'm not saying it's guaranteed, nothing's guaranteed, but at
Nothing
least
is. Nothing is.
nothing
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
But the good thing is that there's a lot more security than, going to a trust or company that someone set up and investing into those kind of opportunities. So I guess that's pretty the point of difference, because the way we set it up was we just wanted to make sure, coming from my point of view, because I invest into a lot of these deals myself, that I want that kind of security to ensure I can sleep at night going, okay, if something happens, I can easily take action if I need to and, get those funds back. Luckily, I haven't had to, because a lot of these lenders and borrowers that we work with have been reputable. And on top of that, they have also been paying their funds back on time. So that makes a good relationship. And then therefore, we do a lot more business with them. And that's really how it evolved and grow organically, from COVID time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so let's talk about the other thing that you do, which is run your podcast.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Forgot about that.
So, forgot about that. So tell us your story. Like, how did you, as such a young man, decide to open up a podcast? And I know, and I felt very honored to be interviewed on your podcast.
Oh,
I know
thank you.
you've interviewed the big dogs right from the start. So how did you get in front of all the leading experts in the property investment space and grow this podcast? And your numbers are crazy. So let's talk about your podcast for a little bit.
Thank you.
Crazy good, not crazy bad.
It actually sort of was inspired out of me driving to work. I used to work full-time in the manufacturing space for a large brick manufacturing company. So hence the reason why I know the property industry quite well, because we were supplying all these bricks and so forth across Australia. I was there for almost about 5 years. And I think about the third year of working there, I kind of got the property bug back on me. Because even though, as I said, growing up, my parents were involved in property, all my uncles all own property and so forth. But at that point in time, I guess I still had a very, very young family. So having a stable job in there helped with, generate some income so I could actually go to the bank and borrow. But at that point in time, I hadn't actually, bought any more property because I was, I guess got busy with family life and, young kids at like 1 and 3 years old. You kind of just go, okay, you focus on that work, generate the income and then that. But then funny enough, one day I stumbled across and bumped into one of my friends who I had worked with, maybe a few years before that. And I heard him on a story on a podcast and I went, hold on, I know him. And I even read him in the magazine. But it was just bizarre because when I saw him in the magazine, which was one of the well-known magazines in Australia, I went, how has he done that, in that short span of time? Because I had only had a chat to him and not caught up with him for a few years, maybe like 3 or 4 years. And at that time, he had already built up 12 properties in that short space of time.
Yeah.
And I knew when I actually was doing stuff with him, he was already starting to buy 2 properties. And I thought, he's doing renos and all that. And I thought, great for him. But in that period of time when I'd not spoken to him, he was featured in the magazine. And it was like, oh, I really wanted to find out more. So I caught up with him and kind of sparked that interest. And it was because of him that got me back into property to really take a serious look at it. Because at that point in time, earning PAYG, good income, but still wasn't enough to continue to do more that I wanted to do, to have more flexibility, lifestyle, etc. And it kind of made me open and go, well, what's missing for me is that I didn't have enough education. I didn't have enough knowledge to be confident enough to be able to go back into the property market. Because yes, I had bought property, I'd learned from Steve and all that kind of stuff, but something held me back from that. So at that point in time, I was listening to a lot of podcasts and I was trying to find kind of like stories, meaning wise, to drive me to actually take some action. Because I had so much knowledge, I had so much how-tos, but the biggest problem amongst listening to all these podcasts was that it didn't talk about the stories of the investors, the journey, the whys.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, all right, could I be bothered to interview these people? And I sat on it for a good year. Honestly, it
took me
a whole year to actually do that, because I was just hoping someone would come up with that. And podcasts were on the rise, and I thought, someone's going to do it. No one did it after a year, and I thought, all right, I'm going to bite the bullet. I'll give it a go. I knew Steve. I knew a lot of those people who were in this circle, and I said, I'll reach out to them and then give it a go. And that's kind of how it started. Was I just thought, hop onto the podcast, invite them on and say, look, I'd love for you to share your knowledge, probably for a selfish reason initially, because I wanted to learn. But at the same time, I thought
that's a great idea. Pick people's brains for free.
And say, look,
for
you know,
an
you got
hour
to be
on your podcast.
on a podcast, and you got to get, you know, your message out there to the market. And it
How
worked
good
out
that.
well. You know, I was very fortunate that, you know, obviously the first few weeks and months and stuff like that didn't really have much growth there. But if you stay consistent, which is what I did, I just persisted at it. The numbers started to show, and you started seeing, okay, a lot of people started to hop on and listen, and then it just organically grew. And
Yeah.
fortunately for me, a lot of the guests shared their podcast and said it was fantastic, and that's why they were more than happy to, you know, tell their audience. And that's how the numbers all grew, and the podcast, you know, became very, very popular. So, you know, obviously it's sitting now at millions and millions of views and downloads because of the community, you know, that has been built up over the number of years that we've been running this podcast. And due to that, you know, we've had a very, very, I guess, great following who have been very supportive, who've also been involved, you know, me with as clienteles of my business as well. And I guess, you know, the rest is history. But yeah, it wasn't easy, I can tell you that.
So why do you think it's so important to share the personal stories and the personal journeys of people that have become experts in their little, let's call it pockets, in this investment world?
Yeah, well, it's funny because that's how we learn. Like, I know how, if you think about it, how do stories get passed on from generation to generation? Or how do information, maybe not stories, information get passed on from generation to generation? And it's usually through a story. You know, if you go and tell someone a fact about something that happened, you know, 20 or 30 years ago, they'll probably forget it because it's just fact. But if you actually tie a story around it and saying the reasons why, put emotion into it, humans will naturally just remember those stories and then, you know, pass that information on. I mean, like a typical story for the kids, and this has been told for generations. Is not like the Three Little Pigs story, the first house, second house, third house, etc. But it was actually a fable, you know, initially, and that kept getting passed down. But if you had told someone about these straw houses and, you know, brick houses that were built by these pigs, probably, you know, that's just a fact. No one cares. So that's the reason why I think it's so important to tell a story, because people resonate with that. Like, I've had hundreds and hundreds of different types of stories, from renovations to developments to buy and hold to so forth. And there would be at least one story that someone would resonate with because they've been through a very similar journey. And for me, like, because I come from like a project management background, an engineer type of, you know, structured logical background, I resonate with a lot of those people who have those kind of stories going, you know, I came from a full-time working job as an engineer. I was working long hours, I had a family of two, struggling to see them. That story resonates with me. And then they built this multi-million-dollar portfolio because they've done X, Y, and Z. So for me, those stories are so important because it drives you to go, you know, the why behind what you're doing, because there's no point to building this portfolio or building this property asset base if you don't have a strong why, because you're not doing it just for the sake of having $20 million worth of property portfolio. You're doing it because you want to achieve a lifestyle. You want to be able to spend more time with family, do charitable work, all those things that actually derive from actually having that actual base of assets. Because ultimately, no one cares you have all that. Sounds great, but what are you actually doing with all that money or all those investments that you have that generate that kind of cash flow for you? And that's why it's so important.
Oh, wow. Okay. So momentum is a real common thing, I think, and an underlying message in our this talk today. Momentum in you creating a way in which people can keep moving in the property space if they've hit lending walls, or and these people that you've interviewed, and me included, what keeps people moving, going? Like, what makes some people keep on going and keep at it, and other people just think, okay, it's all too hard, I've been to the banks said no, or whatever else excuse ends up in their world, like I have an okay job, or I've got 3 kids and I'm too busy. Like, so many people just stop. Is there a common personality trait, do you think, with some of these people that you've interviewed in relation to keeping on going?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of a number of things, but the key thing that I've seen as being the driver for people to keep moving on is their goal. If they have a strong enough goal to tie enough strong enough why to it, then that pursues them or pushes them to keep going. I mean, I'll give you a story about one person who actually goes back to my friend who, you know, started off with those 2 properties, and then in the magazine he had 12 plus properties. And I'm like, how'd you do that? Because for me, I would have probably stopped and go, this is too hard. Now, he went through a pretty challenging time in the first 2 properties because, one, he couldn't afford to buy so many, I guess, expensive properties or then perceived expensive properties. So he had to drive literally about 6 hours up north to be able to buy that property, renovate it, and then come back. And he did that weekend after weekend.
Yeah.
And what I guess pushed him was because his why was to get out of his full-time job.
Yeah.
He'd been there for 8 years, 10 years. I think it was 8 years at the time, but it took him another couple of years to be able to get out of that job. And he got really, really, I guess, stuck, and he just wanted to change his life. And that's what kept pushing him along. For whatever reason it was so strong that helped him keep going. And he had his goal that he had set. Now, once he reached that kind of goal, obviously he had to reset it, but he also had a very strong mentor. And that I will add as well too, is having a strong, accountable mentor that will be able to help you, guide you through. Because yes, you can try to do it on your own, but without that accountability, without that support, it's so difficult. And that's the reason why I recommend to anyone, when you're actually starting out on this journey, get a mentor, whether it be a person who's been there, done that, reach out to them. And that's the kind of journey that you want ahead and follow what they've done. Or whether it be, you pay for a coach that can actually mentor you on an ongoing basis. But you need someone to be able to keep you accountable, support you, and provide you with the knowledge and the skills that you can help to grow your portfolio, grow, investments, and do the renovations or whatever you do. Because you will hit a brick wall at one time in stage in life. It could be many times in life. And you got to ask yourself, what do you do in those times? And you got to lean back on people's support to be able to help, because you can't do it yourself. And property itself is a team effort. I'll give you an example outside of property. If you go to the hospital and you have a particular patient who has, stage 2 cancer of whatever it is, you're not going to be relying on just one specialist trying to help remove this cancer. You're going to have the whole team supporting this person to help them out. Could be nurses, could be anesthetists, could be a surgeon. All these people in the team actually sit there, diagnose, and try to find the best cure to be able to help with this cancer patient. Obviously, if the surgeon just did it by himself, he wouldn't be able to do it. And it's so common that people just don't look at it from that perspective, is that everything that you do, whether it be in property, whether it be in life, you need that support. And even raising kids, as everyone says, you need a farm or you need a village to be able to raise kids. It's no different.
Oh, okay. I loved everything you said right then. I am 100% on board with every word. I could never have done what I've done without mentors all along the way. And that is property mentors, business mentors. And not only that, you learn from their network. You can lean on their network. They have spent many, many years. They've gathered their team of experts, and it just gets you there faster, and it keeps you going, and it gives you faith when you're having a down day. And being with what I like to call everyday people doing exactly what you want to do is that really helps as well. When you see someone who's already trodden through that path and they're making it or have made it out the other end, super important. And so your friend has ended up being a real driver for you, like he.
Yeah. He was as well only a couple of years younger than me. And I only caught up with him probably about a month ago. He was having his second child, and lucky I called him, because once it passes that period of time, he's all hands on deck with the family. But he's built a substantial portfolio in that period of time, even though, yes, it has been 10 years and he focused on that. He really, really did so well, because he just kept staying on track. And at the end of the day, it's about focus, support, but also to just having your goals very, very clear at the beginning, because if that's what you really, really want, then you have that goal attached to a why, which will help you drive through. And if he didn't do that, I think he'd probably still be, kicking himself and sitting in his job and going, why am I still here?
100%.
Changed so much for him.
Yeah. And I also think that people that have done it beforehand, or mentors, know a lot of strategy that can help you leapfrog. You can fossick around and you can fiddle around and you can figure things out for yourself, but they'll take you there much, much faster. And just all of the tips and things that my mind is just blown. Sometimes I go to, and I continue to be mentored, and I go and learn something new, whether it be in business or in property. And sometimes I'm like, well, I didn't know that. That's what those guys are doing, who were doing $20 million properties, and I didn't know that was behind it. We only see what we see. So it's really nice when you get exposed to things at deeper levels.
Oh, totally. And this is actually a very good point. Hence the reason why every time I go into an interview with an expert or guest on the podcast, I learned so much. Like there's so many things, even though the stories may be very similar, it could be a buy and hold strategy, it could be development. There's always something that you can learn. I mean,
Yeah.
even this morning I had a great interview with another guest, and I was really, really amazed at what he achieved. I mean, like he came from a very, very poor background. And I guess from that, he's changed his life because some of the things that he did and a mindset shift allow him to be able to grow his property portfolio and then, get to where he is today and support his mum, family, and help them, especially when they've gone through so many health issues. So something like that, like for me, you can't make that up. It's
really cool. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very, very cool. And the drive behind someone who is starting from zero. I did an interview with a fellow the other day who was a bankrupt, and he was just desperately trying to get back on his feet, one renovation at a time, and has now completed more than 50 and is doing substantially well. So if you can go from bankrupt to 50 homes, that's a big deal.
It is. It's like the rags to riches story, which I love.
I love it. Yeah. And these people, if we don't expose them on podcasts, and if we're not working with them and they're not working with other mentors and all that kind of stuff, these stories go unheard. So yeah, congratulations on everything that you've done in business.
Thank you.
And all of the things that you've achieved personally.
Thanks so much, Belinda. Appreciate it.
For a young fellow, I've watched your journey quietly from the sidelines.
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey. I'm still, learning a lot along the way. The podcast itself has been a fantastic option to be able to sort of share with listeners and just learn as much as possible. Because I guess the feedback that I get from it is that it's told in a way where it's just very natural rather than just, picking at questions of just how to do this. And I think that's the key, because I mean, I could talk about strategies and tips and all that kind of, to the cow come home. And there's plenty of those podcasts out there. But when you actually hear a real life person going through the struggles that they had initially and then to where they are today, it's a real life changing story that can actually impact and then make you, look at it from that perspective and go, wow, if that person can do it, that means that I could also have a chance to do it too. Yes. And that's what's life changing.
Yeah, it is. Okay. If you had one thing to say to somebody who was starting out in their property world, or in their investing world, what would your advice be? One thing.
Well, I always think back to how I was when I was younger, because there's a few opportunities, as I call opportunity costs, that I wish, I just took the plunge and took action. There was a fantastic opportunity that I had when I was living close to West Ryde in Ermington. And I went there for one day to have a look. And even though it was a very rundown kind of place and it was by the water, I thought to myself, it's too much work. I put so many blockers behind that. And I thought, it's going to be too expensive. Back then, it was only like 330,000.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
we've all said no to those.
Yeah, and I said no to those. And I said, man, if I had done something like that and just took action, bit the bullet, even though it may have, been costly initially at the beginning, because at the end of the day, you still got to put money and effort into it. It would have been well worth it. And I think for anyone starting out, rather than sort of procrastinate, which is what I did a lot. I spent a lot of time researching, I spent a lot of time going to seminars and all that. And that's important. Definitely do that, because you need to educate yourself. But you got to get to a stage when you go, okay, I've learned the basics, I've learned the foundations. The next step is to actually take action and implement. And even if you make mistakes, it's okay, because that's where the learning experiences is. Just like I told you at the beginning, if I actually didn't jump in and do that development with the developer up in Queensland, I would not have learned all about the development side that I have now, that knowledge, which allows me to be able to assess deals, which is the larger deals I'm doing now, the way I am now. So you have to also take being a learning lesson, if you do make a mistake, as being a life lesson to be able to help you with other things. Because I made that mistake, back then, was that I just didn't take an action. I just procrastinated, and I didn't do anything for 5 or 6 years until then. And then by then the market had moved, and then I kicked myself, and then, that kind of cycle goes on. So I think for any new investors out there, don't sit on and procrastinate for too long. If you've done research for 12 months, then I'll be questioning you, go, why have you not done anything? Even just get out and go and speak to a broker to find out what your financing options are. Go to Open Homes and put offers down. Even if you put an offer down and it gets rejected, it's okay. Just get out there and take some form of action.
Yeah, agree. Nice message. Thank you so much. Where can people find you if they wish to connect with you, for either to listen to the podcast, first of all, on Spotify and Apple?
Yep. Yeah, on Apple, if you do a search for property podcast, we're usually sitting there at number one. So
I might bump you off one day. Watch out. Linda Smith is coming for you.
Yes, please go for it. I love to see every other podcast as well come up, because I think if everyone gets to share the knowledge that we have, the better it will be for the community. So that's a good thing. Or you can search on Property Investory. So it's just basically the two words is property investor with a Y at the end.com. And if you just hop on the site, there's plenty of resources. You can get a free report and download that, and actually tells you how we actually do all our kind of specific investment opportunities that we talk about. But yeah, I guess it's pretty easy. The reason why I called it Property Investory is because it was really a property investor story, and it was a play on words. So if you just combine those two, you will actually notice that property investory is a combination of investor and story. And that's how you remember it.
Oh, so nice. And your website?
Yep, it's propertyinvestory.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tyrone. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Likewise, and thanks so much for having me on. And it's been a pleasure to chat to you and catch up as well, Belinda.
Cheers. Thank you.